family, and your community.
The flu vaccine is safe and effective. And with COVID-19 still around,
it's essential. Together we can face flu season head on.
Visit michigan.gov/flu.
Hey Laker fans, do you know a friend or neighbor that volunteers in Greater West Bloomfield? We would love to help you recognize them at the 51st Annual Michigan Week Awards. Countless members of the communities of Orchard Lake, Keego Harbor, Sylvan Lake, and West Bloomfield give their time and talent daily without regard for recognition. You can help recognize these individuals and organizations at our awards breakfast next year on May 12, 2023. Nominate your neighbor or organization starting January 28, 2023. Go to michiganweek.org for details.
1 in 4 Michigan homes has high levels of radon, a naturally occurring radioactive gas known to cause lung cancer. It doesn't matter where you live or what type of home you have. You won't even know it's there unless you test. So don't wait. Testing is cheap and easy. And if there's a problem, it's simple to fix. Visit michigan.gov/radon to learn more.
We took action. Will you?
You're listening to your radio homes from the Megacast, 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake and 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills. Today's edition of the Megacast begins now. Welcome to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. Today, we'll be talking to a number of people about topics of interest and importance to Michiganders just like you. Let's begin with what's making headlines today on CivicCenterTV.com's local news page. Our top story comes from Anna Liz Nichols at the Detroit News. Oxford High School students and survivors are demanding action on guns in Michigan, and they want it done in the next 100 days. Said survivor Madeline Johnson, who lost her best friend Madison Baldwin in the shooting, quote, "The youth of America were never meant to attend so many funerals. I'm here today because I'm tired of people telling me how bad they feel or how sorry they are for us. I'm tired of thoughts and prayers that are not backed by action," and closed quote. The event where Johnson spoke and was joined by fellow Oxford High School students as well as teachers and supporters from the community was one of many pushing for gun legislation across our state earlier this week, with others occurring in Detroit, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Lansing, Saginaw, and Marquette. Since the shooting, many bills on gun reform have been proposed, fizzling out in the committee deliberations, but that was in a different legislature. Now a Democratic majority is in the House, the Senate, as well as in the governor's office. So that may perhaps make this a better time to demand action and a better opportunity for action to be taken, being that the Democratic Party believes in taking action on, quote, common sense gun reform. So therefore, maybe the call for action that calls on Democrats leading both houses of the Michigan legislature, as well as having the governorship, to take action. But regardless of party, survivors want action. Teacher Lauren Jasinski said the legislature has, quote, buried their heads in the sand, and, quote, the inaction of our legislature has sent a clear message to students and teachers. Gun violence will be an accepted part of the public school experience, and closed quote. Said Jasinski, the clock is ticking. Madeline Johnson also exclaimed that survivors will not stand down on these calls for reform. Plenty more on these discussions that were had earlier on this week in these different rallies across the state in this article from the Detroit News on our website, on our local news page at CivicCenterTV.com. Also making headlines today from Bridge, Michigan's Ted Ralphs. Half a year after the mental health hotline 988 was initialized in Michigan, state officials are saying more people than ever are reaching out for help in times of mental crisis. Since the onset of 988 in July, the MDHHS reports average monthly calls have risen from about 5,500 at the onset or before the onset of 988 to over 6,300 in that time period, an increase of about 15%. With that comes a problem, however. It's an incredibly taxing task to take all these calls, and it's become even more taxing to do so on service providers over time who are taking these free nationwide 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week calls. Said Grand Rapids-based Arbor Circle's president and CEO Kirsten Gitson, quote, I would say our situation is borderline dire. We should have a staff of about 300 people. but I would say we have approximately 35 positions open, including master's level social workers and licensed professional counselors. But we have had months where we've had to turn away upwards of 100 people who are calling and saying, I would like to get into an outpatient counseling facility, and we just do not have the capacity to take on another patient or another client, and close quote. More staff, more providers, that means more money needs to be allocated to these resources. That would be what would be required. Funding for 988 is set through April of 2024, according to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. However, spokesperson Lynn Sutphin said, beyond that, the money going to 988 funding is still in question. There's a lot to know about this and a lot to unpack here in this article, so I highly encourage you to read through it and learn more about 988 and how it's helped more people reach out in their time of need, but also has put a lot of ways it's put a lot of stress on this new line of service for our state resources, and how long those resources too may be in place with the current funding and with future funding also being a factor. Take a look, civiccentertv.com on our local news page. Finally, making headlines today on civiccentertv.com's local news page from Tanya Wilt at the Detroit Free Press. A 19-year-old woman in Detroit was just on a simple run to a gas station with her friend when her life changed forever. The woman, who has asked to remain anonymous, said her friend purchased and then handed her a Lucky Sevens lottery ticket. When he did that, neither of them had any clue that this ticket would soon be worth over $500,000. Quote, we looked the ticket over, and when we saw I'd won the jackpot, we started screaming and jumping up and down. We looked at the ticket several times because we couldn't believe it was real. I called my family right away to tell them the good news, and closed quote. The 19-year-old has claimed her winnings and says she plans to save her newly earned windfall. Good for her. Finally, making headlines today, and that's all of our headlines today, my apologies. On our website, all of those headlines are there, civiccentertv.com, on our local news page, along with links to COVID-19 updates from the CDC, the NBHHS, and the Oakland County Health Division. We have a great show ahead on this Thursday edition of the Megacast. Coming up next, our weekly mental health talk with Carrie Krawiec from the Birmingham Maple Clinic, and then a lot more after that as well. This is the Megacast.
Many people are feeling overwhelmed and struggling with mental wellness these days. So be kind to your mind. Give yourself permission to breathe. Share your feelings. You are not alone. Have hope. Talk to a Stay Well counselor for free confidential help 24/7 through the COVID-19 hotline.
Watch Civic Center TV with our brand new live captions. To turn on live captions, go to civiccentertv.com and click Watch Live. In your web browser, click on the Options tab in the top right and find the Accessibilities tab. Then just switch on live captions to heighten your enjoyment of our local programming. Thank you so much for watching Civic Center TV.
When you have a gambling problem, you have a money problem. Don't let your gambling cause you financial hardship. If you or someone you love is struggling with gambling, we can help. Get free confidential counseling and win your life back. Learn more at michigan.gov/problemgambling.
The heart of winter. It beats inside you. It's that thing urging you outside when the forecast calls for snow. Some were born with it. For others, it was carved with care. But for all who take winter to heart, it's time. Feel the rhythm of the season and pursue your Pure in Pure, Michigan.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. Learn more about our program on our website, civiccentertv.com/megacast, where you'll find more information on all of our partnering stations across the Great Lakes State, including our co-flagship My Michigan TV, and find all of our full shows and each individual program on demand as well. civiccentertv.com/megacast for all of that. Joining us now for our weekly mental health talk is Carrie Krawiec, a therapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. Carrie, thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning to you as well. And today, an interesting but a tough topic also, as we're talking about issues that people may be having with their family and maybe affecting their mental health, and ultimately some tough decisions that may have to be made regarding those relationships. And so let's begin with at the onset. There's many different ways that people can have issues with members of their family or multiple members of the family, heck, even a large portion of their family. But when those problems do arise, what steps should be taken given that these people are family, you're going to be around them a lot just by the circumstances of life, but also that you can't let necessarily these different problems that are coming up just fester along and ultimately continue to have an impact on your mental health.
Sure, it's so unique to each individual person and each unique family. What one person could find tolerable in terms of behavior, another person may find quite severe and unacceptable. So it's not necessarily one clear rule across the board where the lines draw. One thing I've talked about with my clients is something I call baby boundaries, which just mean incrementally increasing your boundaries and trying there. So sometimes people think, we'd cut off from a toxic partner and be congratulated by our friends for doing the right thing. But when it comes to a toxic family member, everybody's a little bit uncomfortable with just like a solid amputation. And so we suggest trying different things. First limit maybe your time or contact, or be in control of your time and contact. Drive yourself separately, have an exit or escape plan. See if you can control the environment in some way and that's helpful to you. If you try incrementally making, bigger and bigger boundaries to protect yourself and you're still deeply anxious, overwhelmed, or uncomfortable with the experience, or it's becoming more chaotic and out of control or abusive in some way, then ultimately a firm line may have to be drawn and disconnect must have to happen.
And it's gonna be interesting too, because like you said, making those breaks or just straight severing the ties with members of your family doesn't just affect you, it affects other members of your family too. And that can add additional stress too, onto the situation for yourself and for others as well. So when that does become a situation where you may need to break off your relationship with a member of your family or step away from them or make those incremental changes, what steps should also be taken to involve other members of your family, or at least, keep them aware of what you are doing so that maybe it's not so jarring or affecting them in a negative way too?
Sure. I think you're going to probably have to do some education with where you're coming from. Certainly some exploration for why those steps seem to be necessary to you, and giving yourself patience and grace, as well as the people in your family. Your siblings may not feel the same way, say, for example, about as your parents, or may have different circumstances and different relationships, and they may pressure you to, say, for example, get over it or move on or try harder or whatever that may be. And it may just be, taking a deep breath and saying, hey, we have to agree to disagree, or it's clear to me you don't understand my position, but I'm going to be okay with that my decision is okay with me, and that has to be enough. And your decisions to proceed have to be okay with you. And influencing each other isn't appropriate and may even lead to disconnect of this relationship as well.
And that full disconnect isn't always the solution. It isn't always the best solution or the best step to even be taken to deal with some of these different issues. So where should those discussions, when there is an issue, begin? When should you really be going up to that other person in your family or addressing that issue with that member of your family or members?
Again, I think this is again, it probably happens gradually over time. Generally attempts are made to express a position or say, hey, look, I don't like this behavior, or I don't want my children to see you acting this way or treating me this way or treating them that way. And if it persists, then I'm going to, reduce our time together. And then say, for example, it does persist. And then you say, okay, this thing I said I didn't want to have happen anymore is continuing to happen. So now I'm going to take my next action. Often I think, especially with with family. The reason why disconnect happens is because our family members have been unresponsive to our pleas for request, unwilling, stubborn, defensive, whatever, fill in the blank, abusive, hostile towards our requests, truly don't see things the way we do. At some point, I think when final disconnect happens, you come to the conclusion this person does not, cannot, and will not understand me, and therefore a relationship cannot continue.
Are there ways to balance this? Because on the one hand, you don't want to make your family situation necessarily uncomfortable for yourself and for anyone else, but at the same time, being around these people or being around these people behaving in a certain way has an effect on your mental health and can have a significant effect on your mental health too. So is there a way to balance that out and that you would suggest, or is this the situation where when things do get to a certain breaking point, that severing those ties entirely is the solution?
Sure. I mean, I think you have to evaluate, right? Why is it making you so uncomfortable? What is the degree of discomfort? Is it an inconvenience or irritation, or are you deeply panicked, anxious, sleepless, in planning and preparing for those visits? I mean, if the intensity of your symptoms is severe, long, and frequent, and perhaps even leading to a diagnosable, mental health issue, then I think that's really cause for pause, perhaps speaking to a therapist individually or with your family members to arrive at why. Is it so deeply painful for you? If it's just discomfort, like irritation, inconvenience. I think, part of the reason why this topic came up, I'm just speculating here, was, some of the cutoffs you read about in Prince Harry's book. And so I'm thinking like, right, like if it's something too where you've added a new person to the family, say a spouse or partner or child, and you're witnessing discomfort in them. Is it just a lack of familiarity just because it's foreign or different than their own experience? Or is it because it's actually abusive, wrong, hurtful, damaging? Sometimes that takes time and investigation and education, right? That like, this is common, and can adjustments and compromises be made? I'm not familiar with doing things this way. Is it possible we can find some middle ground or compromise? If compromise is impossible or not even considered, even when someone's struggling, then I think that would also be cause to say, yeah, like this family is unwilling to make adjustments for a family member. Families should be places of connection, acceptance, warmth. Not all the time. Of course, any family is going to have friction. But if in general, it's none of that and always something else, pain, denial, lie, mistrust, harshness, then I think you need to look maybe elsewhere for your close relationships needs to be met.
And it's not always necessarily just a rift between individuals in the family. Sometimes it's just certain behaviors of certain members of the family that have been ignored or been tolerated over the years. And then it changes the entire narrative. It changes the entire consideration of the situation when you bring your children into that, especially at young developmental ages. And so for parents, how should they be going about balancing that too? Because not only are you impacting your relationship with those family members and with other members of your family by that way, you're also impacting your kids' relationships with their family and the way that they view family relations too.
Absolutely. I think people can experience so much ambivalence, meaning ambivalence is when you have sort of two competing feelings at the same time. Say, for example, you want your children to have the experience other children have of a, loving grandparent relationship, and you want them to have that bond. And you may even see your parents behave different as grandparents than they did as parents to yourself. And that may be exceptionally touching. And then there may be other things that say, gosh, my kids are just kids. They're not fully equipped to be aware of the dynamics that are at play. Maybe kids don't necessarily see everything that's happening kind of behind the smoke and the mirrors. And you want your children to be protected, which it's your job to do that. You don't want them to have the same experiences perhaps you have. feeling hurt or ignored or rebuked by your own parents. But you also want to have like a healthy grandparent relationship. And that can be a very hard balance for people. They can even experience grief and loss and sadness as a result of sort of accepting that what they want and wish for their kids isn't entirely possible or isn't good.
We're joined by Carrie Krawiec on today's edition of the Megacast. You can find more information and get in contact with Carrie and the other professionals at the Birmingham Maple Clinic by visiting their website at birminghammaple.com or calling them 248-646-6659, 248-646-6659. And, sometimes that clean break is a good thing for you. And sometimes that is also a good thing for the other person or other people involved. And it can be what jars them back to some semblance of reality and causes a change in behavior. So after the fact, after you've made those clean breaks and as time heals some of these wounds in some ways and in others, is there a path that you would suggest take to maybe rekindle that relationship or repair that relationship or those relationships in the family?
Certainly. I mean, I think family therapy is incredibly useful to help each person be seen and heard and understood. I mean, often the things that lead to cutoff aren't just one person being bad, but just a misunderstanding or just an unequal understanding of a situation, and with education about each other's history, personality, perceptions, at least you can arrive at some empathy, patience, or grace for where a person was coming from, even if you don't agree. And I think family therapy can really be helpful to look at those historical contributors to present day problems, and certainly teaching, modeling healthy communication, avoiding defensiveness, avoiding interrupting, avoiding, name calling, body language, gestures, eye rolls, things that diminish that communication. While you're talking about them in the present, and having, a referee of sorts can help keep conversations on track, because often it's not one hurt in a family that's led to cutoff. It could be many successive ones over time, and trying to untangle them, without the help of a trained observer, you end up just kind of throwing in the whole kitchen sink, and it can be really overwhelming and perhaps even hurt more.
More information and get in contact with the professionals at the Birmingham Maple Clinic, maybe to even address some issues you're having with your family as an individual or as a family, can be found birminghammaple.com, birminghammaple.com. You can also send them an email, info@birminghammaple.com, for more information and with any questions. Carrie, before we let you go, anything else that we have not considered yet on this topic or have not discussed that would be important for our audience to keep in mind and consider as they're navigating issues they may or may not be having with their family?
You and I have talked about this a few times. I think we were talking about kind of conflictual holiday meals and things like that. Time and space are your two most important boundaries. So when you're at a family event and you're uncomfortable, find ways to give yourself time and space. If you need to take a walk, excuse yourself to a bedroom, have a code with your partner when it's time to exit. There are small ways you can apply boundaries, but then time and space can also be larger or bigger boundaries. Do you need a few days or weeks between each bit of communication, or face-to-face visit? But considering time and space and looking at those two things as two protective walls you have when you're feeling upset with those family interactions.
Carrie, we appreciate you joining us to talk about this topic. It's a tough topic for people to bring up. It's tough for people to understand or to navigate these situations and come to decisions on whether to address these issues with their family, and certainly whether or not certain members of the family maybe they shouldn't be associating with anymore. And so we appreciate your insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We'll take a break here on the Megacast. On the other side, we'll talk to an organization that's focusing on the mental health of our children and is, in fact, holding their annual conference coming up very soon. After the break, Leo Nouhan from Kevin's Song joins us on the Megacast.
Do you have a child going into kindergarten this fall? The West Bloomfield School District invites you to learn more about kindergarten at the Kindergarten Roundup. Principals and teachers are sharing their important information, including next steps for registration, kindergarten readiness, district-wide services, and more. Each family will also receive a free gift from the Team WB. We can't wait to meet you at the Kindergarten Roundup, Thursday, January 26th at the new West Bloomfield Middle School.
Wondering what to say to someone who's been sexually assaulted or abused?
I believe you. I'm so sorry this happened.
It's not your fault.
Confidential and anonymous help is available at the Michigan Sexual Assault Hotline. Connect with us 24/7. Call 855-VOICES-4 or text 1-866-238-1454 for help. Learn more at michigan.gov/voices4.
Ronnie started doing prescription pills at the age of 15, and by 19, he died. If your child is struggling with drug use, try not to be too proud to reach out for help. Don't be worried about what the neighbor will think or your family. Just get your child the help they need. Sometimes it's the hard road to take, but the hard road is nothing compared to living with the fact that your child is no longer with you.
There's hope and help at drugfree.org.
Let's savor these moments. Made possible by the COVID-19 vaccine. Keep the dining out going by keeping yourself protected and your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
I'm Steve Eiserman of the Detroit Red Wings, and I think every child in Michigan deserves a safe, healthy, and happy childhood. Can we build a state where Children Trust Michigan isn't just a name, but something our kids believe? Please support Children Trust Michigan as the voice for children and families by visiting the website to learn more.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. Learn more on our website, civiccentertv.com/megacast. Find info on all of our partnering stations and find all of our shows and individual interview segments on demand as well. civiccentertv.com/megacast. Joining us now on the program from Kevin's Song is Leo Nouhan. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, suicide is the leading cause of death in the U.S. Was the leading cause of death in the U.S. with 47,646 deaths in 2021. And this is about 1 in every 11 minutes. And Kevin's Song, his organization, is holding a conference coming up on January 26th through 28th in Plymouth. Leo, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Tyler. I appreciate the opportunity to share some information about our upcoming conference.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you on. We've had you on previously, or have had your organization on previously to talk about its past conferences. But let's begin with just talking about Kevin's Song and this organization. Tell us about Kevin's Song, how this organization came about, and what work it does in the community to help address this issue of suicide.
Kevin's Song was started approximately 10 years ago after the death of Kevin Urso, the son of John and Gail Urso, who took his life by suicide. And in the midst of their grief and confusion and frustration over Kevin's death, John and Gail decided that they wanted to do something in his honor to help other people who might have similar experiences with a loss to suicide. So they formed Kevin's Song, and the objective was to enable information and resources about suicide and about people that are at risk for suicide and prevention strategies to be shared in the community with individuals, with mental health professionals, with educators, and with the community at large. And so that's what Kevin's Song has done over the past 10 years, is sponsor a conference every year. This is actually our 7th conference. And Kevin's Song also has support groups that it runs for survivors. It is got an ongoing partnership with Detroit Public Television, and we've done a number of broadcasts on Detroit Public Television about different issues, especially affecting youth suicide. We've done a feature documentary film with documentary filmmaker Keith Famey, and we are continuing to collaborate on a statewide basis with other suicide prevention organizations in order to prevent this situation, this horrible thing from happening to people, and to try to save lives.
Kevin Song's annual conference, their 7th annual conference on suicide, Building Roads to a Better Tomorrow, will be happening January 26th through the 28th at St. John's Resort in Plymouth. You can find more information by going to their website, kevinsong.org/conference, kevinsong.org/conference for more information, as well as how you can participate in this 3-day conference. And Leo, as we talk about these different initiatives for this organization of going out in the community and addressing suicide in a number of different ways, it's interesting to learn about this year's conference and some of the other efforts that are also being undertaken to, like you said, address suicide across the board, but also really focus on youth suicide. That's continued to be a growing issue. And so not only are you holding your 7th annual conference for your organization, you're also adding into that for the 4th year in a row, the school summit that's going to happen on Thursday, January 26th. Tell us more about that and how addressing these issues in schools maybe differs from in other areas, given especially the world we're living in today and all the pressures and different factors that are impacting our kids and ultimately leading some of them, unfortunately, to taking their lives.
Yeah, I think, Tyler, that especially with the pandemic, I think the whole issue of the impact of external stressors on young people has become apparent and has really manifested itself in a number of ways. During the pandemic, actually, the height of the pandemic, the suicide rate went down a little bit, but calls to crisis centers skyrocketed. And now we're beginning to see the aftermath of those stressors and those negative factors that impact young people in terms of the isolation, the separation from friends, just changes in their lives that were totally unexpected. And those factors kind of pile on to other maybe personal issues that are going on with young people. So counselors and teachers and school administrators are really confronted with issues that are really affecting youth in a very significant way. And so the school summit is an attempt to bring people together, educators together from all different parts of the state, to bring in some national speakers to address some of the specific issues that impact young people and specific strategies on how we can help to prevent suicide as being a choice or as being a consequence of these stressors.
We're joined on the program today by Leo Nouhan from Kevin Song, their 7th annual conference on suicide, Building Roads to a Better Tomorrow. Again, that's happening January 26th through January 28th. You can find more information on their website, kevinsong.org/conference, as well as more information on Kevin Song on their website too, kevinsong.org for more information. And not only is the school summit part of this conference is 3 days long and is really looking at suicide prevention and interventions from a number of different angles. So for those that may be participating or just want to know about what this conference will entail, what are some of the other ways that your organization is exploring this topic and looking for ways to not only prevent suicide, but intervene in situations where individuals may be feeling suicidal tendencies?
Yeah, I could point out a couple things that would be really pertinent and might be interest to your audience. We're going to have a presentation at the school summit by Jody Sprague from Spectrum Health. And Jody is going to talk about a Blue Envelope program. That is an initiative that Spectrum rolled out from the hospital environment and kind of adapted it to a school environment where everyone in the school is trained on how to identify young people who are at risk, and then to respond when a child manifests these risk factors to respond in a positive way to intervene and get that child help. On Friday, we're going to hear from a number of different speakers about things like suicide in the workplace and how employers and employees can be better prepared to deal with stressors at work that might affect their mental health. We have speakers presenting on veterans and the effect of chronic pain on suicide. We have a big discussion about the 988 crisis line. What are the positive factors of that, and how will that help especially disenfranchised communities? We have a representative from the Trevor Project on Thursday who's going to talk about the particular stressors and factors that impact youth involved in the LGBT community. They are at higher risk for suicide, and we're going to hear about some of the strategies to combat that. And on Friday, we're also going to hear from Greg Flynn, who is the fire chief in West Bloomfield. And Greg is going to talk about the Yellow Rose Initiative. And that is a program that really celebrates and supports first responders. They are the folks that are always the first on the scene of a suicide attempt or of a completed suicide. They have to deal with very serious issues. And Greg's Yellow Rose Initiative is one that pledges support to those individuals and to provide people who are at risk with the needed help that they get, whether it's mental health support or financial support or marital relationship support. There's a lot of factors that go into what causes someone to opt or be pushed into a situation of suicide. And so these are all situations that are going to be addressed on Thursday and Friday. And then on Saturday, we have a program that's dedicated to people that have had a loss, either lost a loved one to suicide or even people that have attempted and survived an attempt. And we're going to bring in Kevin Berthia and Kevin Briggs, which is a team of national suicide prevention advocates. Kevin Berthia stood on the Golden Gate Bridge over 10 years ago attempting to jump. And Kevin Briggs, who was an officer on the bridge, basically talked him down. And the two of them now are good friends, and they speak to audiences about their experience and about the need for a national strategy to combat suicide. So all of these factors together, prevention and dealing with the loss, these are the things that the Kevin Song Conference focuses on. People can go to our website. They can go to all 3 days. They can go to any one day. If anyone would like a scholarship because they can't afford the cost of the conference, they can email me at leo@kevinsong.org, and I can make sure that I get them a ticket. We don't want anyone to miss the conference because they may not be able to afford the registration fees based on their circumstances.
More information can be found on their website, kevinsong.org, for information directly on their conference, including registration info. You can find that at kevinsong.org/conference. And Leo, what I love about this conference is that it does look at the issue of suicide from a number of different angles, from a number of different perspectives, and at different points in the process of somebody, becoming potentially suicidal, being suicidal, attempting, and then also looks at survivors too, and those that are close to people that maybe don't survive as well. And it's so important to look at this from all those different angles because it affects people in everyday life in a number of different situations in a number of different ways. And so ultimately, when you have these conferences, when Kevin Song has these conferences, what has the outcome been, and what is the hope from the 7th annual conference that your organization hopes people come out on the other side with?
Well, I think the most positive thing that I can point to is the fact that more and more people are aware and are talking about the risk of suicide and suicide prevention. 25 or 30 years ago, no one ever talked about breast cancer. It was taboo. There was a stigma associated with it. And moving forward 30 years, we now have tens of thousands of people who march dressed in pink clothing and wearing ribbons to raise money and raise awareness for breast cancer. That's what we would like to happen with suicide awareness. And it's going to take governments and legislatures and policymakers and communities and hospitals and employers and individuals to all come together and to change the culture around the need for mental health support and the need for identifying people that are at risk. And only then will, I think, as a society, we'll able to try to come to terms with preventing suicide in a meaningful manner. The final thing I wanted to say was that evidence of the awareness of suicide prevention can be seen by the fact that 2 years ago, the governor, Whitmer, in the state of Michigan, appointed a suicide prevention commission. And so for the first time in Michigan's history, we have a dedicated force of about 24 individuals who represent all aspects of suicide prevention: first responders, insurance companies, educators, suicide prevention advocates, from every aspect of all the stakeholders. And they have come together and they meet regularly about developing a strategy for the state of Michigan. And that strategy of suicide prevention will trickle down to every community, every county, every city, and hopefully every workplace and every household. That's what Kevin Song's mission is, to help to send and deliver that message, to enable people to get together, to collaborate, and to try to save lives.
Leah, we appreciate you joining us to tell us more about Kevin Song as well as the annual conference. Appreciate you joining us and giving us all this information today.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
More information can be found, including ways you can register for their 7th annual conference happening January 26th through January 28th at kevinsong.org/conference. We'll take one final break here on the Megacast. On the other side, we'll be joined by my local doctor to talk about the many different services that can be provided to treat and maybe even reverse some of the effects of autism spectrum disorders. Dr. Bonnie Price-Linden joins us next on the Megacast.
When the temperatures are chilly, being together warms the soul. Keep the winter fun going. Help protect yourself and those around you by keeping your COVID-19 vaccines up to date.
What's happening around you? Hear about state events, businesses, and from the people behind them on the Megacast, an hour-long TV, radio, and streaming show keeping you informed on the day-to-day news. Listen in on talks with volunteer groups, documentarians, and financial advisors, Monday to Friday with your host, Tyler Kieft. Catch the Megacast weekdays from 10 a.m. to 11 on Civic Center TV, 89.3 Lakes FM, and streaming on mymytv.com.
There are many different kinds of noses. Our noses can sniff out all kinds of things. Good things and bad things. Your nose knows if those sniffles are just a cold, allergies, or COVID-19. So swab it. Test it. It's good to know.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Michigan. I'm Tyler Kieft. You can learn more about our program on our website, civiccentertv.com/Megacast, including all of our partnering stations, and find us on demand, civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Well, we know, and we've learned so much more over time about the different ways that autism spectrum disorder affects our children and those throughout their lives as well. And joining us now to talk about some of the ways that this issue is addressed and even treated is Dr. Bonnie Price-Linden with Linden Neuropsychological Services. Dr. Linden, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you on. And it's interesting because we've learned so much over the course of time, even over just the last 10 years, about the variety of different ways that autism can affect children and affect adults as well. But not so much has been maybe discussed about the variety of different treatments for autism spectrum disorder and how those treatments have evolved over time. So as we begin, tell us about some of the different ways that you and your practice treats autism spectrum disorder, and how some of these different treatments have maybe evolved over time to become perhaps more effective.
Well, I think that we are learning more and more about the causes of autism. And as we begin to understand it from how the brain is operating, we are better able to focus our treatment plans on helping the brain to function in a better way. And so I've been working in the last perhaps 5 to 6 years on linking movement and sound, which is becoming more and more the a way of causing the brain to increase its excitability, increase its output, and therefore helping the children focus better. So I've been working on that system, and I have found it very effective.
Just how much more effective has early intervention been over the course of time, especially in recent years, and just how important is that early intervention in determining the outcomes of children in particular who are on the autism spectrum?
That is the most important issue that we are looking at for those of us who treat autism. How early should we be intervening? Early intervention is crucial. Identifying these kids almost from the time of birth can be done by watching how they track with their eyes. And if we do this more earlier and more effectively, at least I have found, and I believe, which is true in the whole field, is that we are much more effective in helping the child reach much more normal functioning. So I think early intervention is crucial.
And how are those early interventions implemented? What are you looking for when you are faced with a patient who with a pediatric patient on the autism spectrum, in terms of what you're looking for and what might be the most effective treatment for that individual, given that this is a spectrum and autism is going to affect different people in different ways?
That's a really good question because it is so diverse. I don't think in looking at a child, you specifically say, well, they have this kind of manifestation or that symptom. You're looking at the whole picture. Is that child progressing? And then you sort of say, well, okay, in what ways is the child not progressing? But in general, what you're doing is pretty much the same thing, regardless of the severity of the symptoms. You are working to enable the brain to much more excitability, much more intensity, and you are hoping that as you move through interventions such as movement and pairing that with a sound, that you are going to see the child hold and continue to progress, regardless of whether or not this is some kind of a deterioration that's going on within the brain. So it's a neuromuscular disorder as well. You're always staying focused on keeping that child moving. And the issue is to get them moving as early as possible. So literally, you can watch them as almost newborns, and you can say to some degree of certainty, this child is going to evidence some kind and is evidencing some kind of interference in their progression. And so from my point of view, I think the earlier we can get in there and have the children come in to see someone who is able to assess it is just beneficial to the child and the family.
More information can be found on Linden Neuropsychological Services.com. You can also call them toll free at 833-333-3595. Toll free call 833 333-3595 for more information and to make an appointment with their offices here in Michigan as well as in New York. Dr. Price-Linden, as we talk about early intervention and we discuss, getting those treatments for particularly kids as early as possible on the autism spectrum disorder to have the best outcomes as possible. Let's go into some detail about what some of those different treatments may be and how those treatments ultimately do help to not necessarily reverse the causes of autism, but to help these kids adjust to better outcomes ultimately on the other side as they continue their treatment.
Well, the first thing you do with any child is, particularly on the spectrum, is it takes a village. You are using treatments from occupational therapy, physical therapy, ABA, if that is makes sense to use with that particular child. But when they're very young, ABA would not fit into that idea. But you get them moving with OT and PT. I think that's basically it, because at that point, it's a very solitary situation for that child. Putting them into groups, perhaps when they're 2, 3 years old, might be helpful, but it's mostly very focused on attention and developing and helping that child to be very active. So things even like gymnastics when they get older, anything that is physical and anything that is moving them is very helpful to them. Because as we learn more and more about the brain, we are seeing, and I think perhaps we need to relabel autism as not just a social disorder, but some kind of deterioration of the way that the neurodevelopment is taking place. I think if we understand that, then we are much better able to act effectively on behalf of the children. So because of the diversity, I've had children come in who literally had no strength at all, could not stand up, could not walk, could not ambulate. And as opposed to some children that don't have any of that, then some children can speak and others can. So it is very, very diverse. So it has to be a general approach, almost in effect, a shotgun approach, which is focused on movement, activity, sound pairing. That's pretty much how I see it.
We're joined by Dr. Bonnie Price-Linden on today's edition of the Megacast from Linden Neuropsychological Services, where she is the director of that organization. More information can be found Linden Neuropsychological Services.com. Linden Neuropsychological Services.com is her website. Dr. Linden, before we let you go, anything else that we should be considering at this time, or parents should be considering about interventions with their child's autism and getting the right treatment at the right time to make sure their kid has as best of an outcome as possible with this diagnosis?
I think that's an easy one. I think it's most important that a parent not feel, let's wait and see. Let's give it time. I think that is the most crucial mistake that happens. I've had parents approach me in a store. I have a 5-month-old who's not progressing. That's a child who should be seen. The parent has the best sense of when the child is not moving along properly. And they often have that sense right at the beginning, right after birth. That's a child who should be evaluated by someone who can look at the child and at least give you some thoughts about where the child is at. Waiting is not in the best interest of the family or the child.
You can consult with Dr. Price-Linden and the professionals at Linden Neuropsychological Services by visiting their website, lindenneuropsychologicalservices.com, as well as making a toll-free call for an appointment at 833-333-3595 with locations here in Michigan, in Plymouth, as well as in Brooklyn, New York. Dr. Price-Linden, thank you so much for joining us and discussing this today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Linden Neuropsychological Services.com is their website. Again, the toll-free number to make an appointment, 833-333-3595. That will do it for this edition of the Megacast. We appreciate you joining us today to talk about a number of different topics about our mental health and our neurological health as well. That seemed to be the theme of today's program. You can find all these interviews if you're just tuning in at the conclusion of our show on demand, civiccentertv.com/megacast, typically mid to late afternoon. We'll have those posted on our website, as well as our full episode from today on civiccentertv.com/megacast. Big thank you to all of our guests, as well as our crew at the studio of My Michigan TV for making this program possible today. That's it for today's Megacast. We'll be back soon.
My Michigan TV is streaming everywhere on Apple TV,